Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. We are in the dog days of summer, and we do this every year. Sitting in the summer months, you kind of get that itch to look at some of the bigger games we're going to see week one. I get the national media will want to talk about Ohio State and Texas. And I'm excited for that game too. Notre Dame going on the road to play Miami Sunday night is the game I'm most excited for. You look at the storylines heading into this matchup, and they're absolutely elite. Before we get into the nitty gritty conversation about this football game, let's start with something that both Notre Dame and Miami fans can agree upon. That is the offensive line play is going to be elite. And you're looking at two, in my opinion, top five offensive lines in the country going into 2025. How about this still sneaky rivalry game? Like, go back to the last time Notre Dame played Miami on the road. Believe it was in 2017. That place was an absolute zoo. And then you look at a young quarterback in CJ Carr, presumably CJ Carr, taking over this Notre Dame offense, going up against the Miami Hurricanes defense that was miserable down the stretch, but has a brand new roster and a brand new coaching staff. The matchups are elite in this football game. I'm fired up to get into them. Before we do it, as always, and this is probably the most important part about doing these early game previews, y'all let it fly in the comment section. Dill, we do it every single year, and it's a battlefield in the comment section. Y'all going to go at it about a football game that we're not going to see for the next couple of months. Please let it fly. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, Dill, let's get into it. And I feel like when you're breaking down this football game, you have to start with this Notre Dame offense going up against this Miami Hurricanes defense, because those are the two units that you probably have the most question marks about. To me, it starts with, Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman are going to want to run the football. Like, give their young quarterback a run game to lean on in a hostile environment. It's going to be a huge storyline because you look at it and say, hey, I'm a really big fan of the Miami Hurricanes personnel on the defensive side of the football. I think they have multiple guys that have a chance to go top 100 in the NFL draft over the next couple of years. One of the question marks I have, the depth of the interior defensive line. Look, I like Justin Scott going into year two. Big fan of David Blay. Y'all know I love Ahmad Moten. But outside of those three, there are some question marks about, hey, who's 3, 4, 5? What's the depth look like in the middle of this defensive line? Well, if Notre Dame can go on the road here, stay on the football field, establish the run, kind of make this Miami Hurricanes defense in that South Florida heat play a lot of snaps, that's kind of where it starts. Can you establish the run game and get to the depth of this Miami Hurricanes defensive line? To me, that's where this football game starts.
Yeah, I also think it keeps you out of your one worry if you're a Notre Dame fan, and that's probably the pass rush. Because I mean, you look even last year, that was probably the one issue with Notre Dame's offensive line was the pass rush. But you talk about that run game matchup. I think it's going to come down to the linebacker play. Because I think you said it. Like, Miami's top end personnel on the defensive line is going to be just fine. And I know Notre Dame's offensive line is obviously very good too. These linebackers, Notre Dame's offensive line does a really good job getting up to the second level. This is a unit that didn't play well enough, I didn't think, from Miami last year. Brought in, obviously, Mo Torre from Rutgers, who, when he was healthy, was really good.
Yeah.
But are you going to have the linebackers to play against a Notre Dame rushing attack that can go inside, they can go outside?
Yeah.
Probably the best running back, not probably, the best running back in the country. Are they going to be able to contain?
And Bill, here's the thing with the linebackers. You got to be damn good against a running back like Jeremiah Love, because if you fit the run poorly or if you miss a tackle in a phone booth, like, you're not only going to get hurt for 10 yards. Jeremiah Love's going to make you pay. And so can these linebackers consistently make tackles in space? Can they consistently fit the run? It's a very good point, because you look at it and say, all right, well, one, I'm confident that Corey Hetherman can develop linebackers. You're young and you have some new faces in the room. Can it all come together immediately for Miami on defense, specifically with those linebackers week one against Notre Dame? Here's the other X factor, Dill. Miami went to the transfer portal back in the winter and grabbed a safety from Jack State named Zachariah Poyser. He's elite coming into the box and fitting the run. And I think that Miami's going to ask him to do that, because I think project number one for Miami is, hey, we got to try to take away the run game and make CJ Carr come on the road and beat us through the air. Well, if Zachariah Poyser does spend a lot of time in the box supporting the run, then the prime matchup is this Notre Dame passing attack, getting some numbers and getting some one-on-ones on the outside. And this is where I think Notre Dame is fundamentally different from what they were in 2024. Like, it always felt like the one thing that was holding Notre Dame back from winning a national championship last year is, can we push the ball down the field effectively? You know, Riley Leonard, as good as he was facilitating the run game, was an elite pushing the ball down the field. I don't think Notre Dame had an elite enough wide receiver room last year. Well, this year they do. This is the first time in a long time I'm looking at this Notre Dame pass catch room and saying they got absolute dudes, and they got a quarterback that is talented enough to get them the football. You start looking at these matchups and say, all right, OJ Frederick, Xavier Lucas, working against some of these wide receivers on the outside. That has the chance to be a very impactful matchup in this football game on a Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, because if Miami can't really deal with the pass with like kind of single high look, I would think that's going to be, I feel like, just a problem. Because again, you look, that was what teams were able to do at times against Notre Dame last year, was you didn't really have to deal with wide receivers. They weren't really moving the ball down the field. So you could play a little bit more of a tighter box, if you will.
Here's the other matchup that I think is very intriguing is whoever's going to play nickel for Miami, you know, whether it's Charles Brantley coming from Michigan State, whether it's Damari Brown working against Jaden Greathouse. I look at Jaden Greathouse and say we could be talking about this kid as a top 10 wide receiver in the country come the middle of October. And I think it's fair to say that the Miami Hurricane fans, I think, have some confidence in both OJ Frederick and Xavier Lucas on the outside. It's not going to be easy. So I think Malachi Fields is an absolute dude working the boundary coming from Virginia. But I look at that matchup and say, your nickel versus Jaden Greathouse, who I think is clearly that number one pass catcher for Notre Dame. That's the question Miami Hurricane fans have. How does that matchup play out? Going to be really important as well. The fundamental difference here is Notre Dame, I think, has a passing attack that can make defenses pay if they want to try to give heavy boxes and stop the run. That's going to be the biggest storyline here. Now, switching sides, Dill, this Miami Hurricanes offense versus this Notre Dame defense, I know we're kind of running back the same storyline here, but I look at the Notre Dame defensive line and say it's a little bit smaller than I think we're accustomed to seeing, and you have to replace guys like Howard Cross and Riley Mills. You look at this Miami Hurricanes offense this year, and I think everybody's going to assume it's going to be this high-flying passing attack like we saw with Cam Ward last year. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Miami's going to lean on an elite offensive line with some very good running backs in Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle, and Shamar Brown. Does Notre Dame have the bodies? Does Notre Dame have the physicality and size in the middle of that defensive line to deal with a very powerful and big Miami Hurricanes offensive line that I believe will try to run the football on Sunday night against Notre Dame?
Because, I mean, you saw when Riley Mills wasn't playing, you saw a meaningful decline in Notre Dame's ability to stop the run. I mean, you saw like Ohio State run the ball pretty effectively, obviously Penn State. I think both went for over 200 yards. And if Miami can run it like that, that's going to be a problem because it's really hard to win games when you're giving up 200 plus on the ground. And that is pretty clearly to me what Miami is going to want to do because Carson Beck I don't think he's ideally fit to throw the ball as many times like Cam Ward was throwing it. I think he works much better off of play action with the run game because when Georgia ran the ball with him, he was really effective. When they didn't run the ball with him, he was very ineffective. So that is going to be what Miami's offense is going to be built around. To me, it's going to be about Jared Dawson and honestly, Sean Stavellano, the young kid. He's probably going to need to play really effectively because I just don't love the matchup for like Heinisch and Rubio and Onye. Like, again, those guys are good players in certain games because they probably bring a little more pass rush juice.
Yeah.
But you saw moments against those teams that wanted to be physical, like Penn State. It was a problem. I mean, they were getting moved around a lot. So you look at some of those young defensive linemen Notre Dame's been able to recruit and then bring in Jared Dawson. Those guys are going to need to be monsters because this Miami team runs the ball in a very physical style that I think will be tough on some of those smaller D-lines.
Yeah, a lot of inside zone for Miami. Here's another thing, though, that makes you feel good if you're a Notre Dame fan. You do probably have one of the best linebacker rooms in the country behind that defensive line. So although maybe you have some question marks about the defensive line holding up from just a physicality standpoint, you more than make up for it with a linebacker room that I think has the ability to be one of the best rooms in the country. I think we all
That's
know
like Giuliano and Sa especially needs to be like you
the
saw
guy.
those moments where like
Yeah.
making negative plays and like Drake Bowen, that's probably not his game. He's just a really solid sideline to sideline linebacker.
Yep.
You probably need Kingston to be really disruptive because if they can get negative plays in this Miami team, I think they'll put themselves in a good spot, especially to start teeing off in the pass rush.
And I think that you're probably going to see some 3 linebacker stuff with Jalen Sneed, who I think gives you the athleticism to, kind of deal with a guy like Elijah Lofton, who, hey, if you're going to play 3 linebackers, you got to have a linebacker that can run with that Miami Hurricane tight end. But you also want to make sure you have personnel on the field to stop the run. Here's the other storyline, Dylan. This is probably the biggest storyline of not only this football game, but a large storyline with the Miami Hurricanes in 2025 in general. You got the wide receivers on the outside to make it happen. I could already tell you what Marcus Freeman and Coach Ash are going to want to do on defense. They're going to play man coverage with probably single high safety, roll one into the box and say, hey, we're going to bring a safety into the box. We're going to try to stop the run. And we're going to say, hey, can you beat us on the outside? It worked for them against Georgia. It worked for them against Penn State because those teams did not have wide receivers that could make Notre Dame pay for loading the box. Still, we saw Notre Dame's defense struggle against 2 teams all of last year. It was Ohio State and USC at times, right? What do both of those teams have in common? They got dudes who can win on the outside. If Notre Dame does, in fact, spin that safety into the box, play man coverage on the outside with an elite cornerback duo with some really good safeties too, does Miami have the wide receivers to make Notre Dame pay here?
Well, and that will be the other thing for Notre Dame is how do they replace Watts? Because Watts was awesome. I mean, Watts in that single high look was so good.
Yeah,
He was such a good tackler in open space. You kind of wonder it's going to be Stroman or Talich, probably. It sounds like Talich to me would be the fun one. But you look, that is going to be a very interesting thing for Notre Dame because again, I think Xavier Watts, as much as like, yeah, you like to talk about the 2 corners, and that's not downplaying what they did, but Xavier Watts was really, I think, kind of key in that ability to play kind of a cover 1 defense pretty consistently because you had a very rangy, instinctual safety who was making a lot of plays in the back end. Do they have that guy in the back end to play that sort of system again?
I think Xavier Watts is probably, he's probably the most difficult guy to replace on that Notre Dame defense as a whole. And we've seen Notre Dame just like roll it out. Like the amount of injuries they had to deal with last year and just like replacing guys, they could do it for a lot of guys. Even a cornerback like Benjamin Morrison, who I thought was really good. They kind of replaced him and you didn't really notice a difference. Xavier Watts is that he had such a massive impact on this defense over the last couple of years. Can they replace a veteran player like that? Shannon Dawson's going to need to help his wide receivers out. Like, I think you're going to get a lot of man coverage. If I'm a Miami Hurricane fan, I'm not fired up about my boundary cornerbacks my boundary wide receivers just winning one-on-one against these Notre Dame defensive backs. And it's not necessarily a shot at Miami's wide receivers. It's more of a shot at, or more of like giving them the flowers, the Notre Dame cornerbacks. Like they were able to lock up just about every wide receiver room in the country outside of Jeremiah Smith. Shannon Dawson's got to help him out. Like, give him some man beaters, help them with your play calling, find some separation and getting open. Dill matchups. Elijah Lofton versus whoever's going to have to deal with him. Whether it's Jalen Sneed, whether it's Jaden Osbury. Because if you are Miami, yeah, I'm excited to see what JoJo Trader can do. I'm excited to see what a guy like Marion from BYU can do or CJ Daniels. That's probably not the matchup I want to attack because of how good Notre Dame's cornerbacks are. I'll look at Elijah Lofton with whoever they decide to put on him and try to deal with him. To me, he's probably the X factor in this football game because he's a tight end that I think can give a lot of people some problems, especially in man coverage.
And he might just be the X factor for this Miami offense because, again, you said it. Like, you don't have that guy that you just can point to and say, I kind of know what I'm going to get. And again, maybe these young wide receivers from Miami surprise on the upside and, like, that's a really good situation. But right now, especially, you said it in that game. And now, like, Adnan Shula, like, they can play against tight ends. We saw them be pretty effective. I mean, I know Tyler Warren caught for some yards, but he caught for some yards on pretty much everyone. He was just like a unique unicorn of a player. But against teams that wanted to play with the tight end like Georgia, I did think Notre Dame had the personnel with guys like Sneed and Schuler and other players like that who were big enough, physical enough, but also athletic enough to run with tight ends. So That'll be the interesting one. Again, I think if Miami can't run the ball, that is clearly where it starts.
Oh, yeah,
Something's gonna
yeah.
need to be a decent matchup on the outside to at least keep it competitive there.
So the last matchup, especially talking about like if you can get Miami into some of those third and long situations, these Notre Dame edge rushers, not necessarily against Francis Mauigoa, who I don't. There's just not many edge rushers who are beating him. He's one of the best in the game at right tackle. Markel Bell. I'm very, very high on Markel Bell, and I think you could get very, very good play from him in 2025. But when he has struggled, it's been with some of these twitchier, bendier guys that can win on his outside shoulder because he's a really big dude. Boubacar Traore coming off of the injury. Again, you talk about like storylines that have such a big impact, not only on this football game, but for Notre Dame in general. Can you get that elite winner off the edge? Whether it's Boubacar, whether it's a guy like Bryce Young going into year two, that's the other matchup I'm looking for. Like some of these twitchier, longer guys winning on the outside shoulder against Markel Bell. All right, Dale, let's get into the pick here. We'll just call the winner. 1.5 point spread. Notre Dame going on the road to Miami. Who we got?
I'd probably go Notre Dame just
Yeah.
because I simply have more confidence that they can do what essentially I think both teams need to do, which is stop the other team's rushing attack, mainly because those boundary corners are so good. I think they can play that system where they get their safeties into the box a little bit more and be a little more impactful. I just look if Miami tries to do that, do I have a ton of confidence that they can stop the passing attack? Not after last year. And I know it is obviously a whole different roster, a whole different coaching staff, but like that's going to need to come together. I just think right now I look at it, I know that Notre Dame is going to be able to play that style of ball. I don't know that Miami has guys who can really consistently win on the outside against a Leonard Moore or a Christian Gray. So for that reason, I'd probably go Notre Dame.
So this hurts me too because you know I'm so high on both these football teams. It's like picking between like two of my children going into 2025. When I'm in a game like this where it's like, all right, the point spread's 1.5 points, you think it's going to be a very good game. I look at two things. What quarterback do I trust more and what head coach do I trust more? Which is really tough because when you talk about quarterbacks I trust more going in this football game, I probably trust Carson Beck more than I do CJ Carr because I've seen Carson Beck play in these high magnitude football games and play pretty damn well. And I know people want to talk about Carson Beck in 2024. When it's time to play good football, we've seen Carson Beck play good football in these spots, and he's been in a lot of these spots over the last 2 years for Georgia. So I kind of lean Carson Beck there. But then you look at Mario versus Marcus Freeman and say, big games, what head coach do I trust to win those big games more? You have to lean Marcus Freeman after what you saw him do in the 2025 year or 2024 year. Miami's at home. They're going up against a young quarterback in CJ Carr who has not been in these moments. As of right now, I'm going to lean Miami because I lean the quarterback playing these big moments. I don't do I love it? Do I think both of these teams are probably going to be in the college football playoffs? Yes, I do. I'm going to lean Miami with the experience at quarterback over a guy like CJ Carr. If this game was played in late November, maybe if this game was played in late November or in South Bend, maybe my pick is a little bit different. But right now, I'm going to lean Miami. Appreciate you guys rocking with it, Dill. We'll talk about this game plenty over the next couple of weeks. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.